Winchester Model 1897. This pump-action shotgun had already proven itself in the trenches of World War I, and when the Second War came around, American forces brought it back into service. Soldiers called it the trench gun, and for good reason. Its exposed hammer could be manually cocked, but most experienced users simply held the trigger down and cycled the pump continuously, firing as fast as they could work the action. In the dense jungles of the Pacific, where Japanese soldiers charged at close range through thick vegetation, nothing cleared a path faster. The gun held 6 shells, weighed around 4 kilograms loaded, and its heat shield and bayonet lug made it just as usable in hand-to-hand range as at short distance. The Japanese government formally protested its use, calling it inhumane. The Americans kept using it. Remington Model 11. Where the Model 1897 was a pump, the Remington Model 11 was semi-automatic, meaning each pull of the trigger fired and reloaded on its own without any manual cycling. It was based on a John Browning design and had been a popular civilian hunting gun before the war. The U.S. military adopted it for guards, military police, and rear area security duties where a fast, easy-to-operate weapon was more useful than a precision rifle. Pilots and aircrew stationed at bases in remote areas also carried versions of it for personal protection. It was never a frontline assault weapon, but in the hands of someone protecting a supply depot or airfield perimeter, it was entirely adequate. Stevens Model 520 and Model 620. These two shotguns were closely related, essentially the same design updated between production runs, and both served American forces during the war in the same capacity as the Model 1897. The 520 was the older version, while the 620 featured a slightly modernized receiver and action. They were pump-action, reliable, and straightforward enough that even troops with minimal training could operate them under stress. Because of their simple mechanics and relatively low cost, they were ordered in reasonable numbers and distributed mainly for base security and rear area operations. Neither ever became famous, but both did exactly what was asked of them without complaint. The flare pistol. Almost every military on every side of the war issued some version of the flare pistol, and while it was not a weapon in the traditional sense, it was carried as standard equipment by soldiers and airmen across every theater. The concept was simple. A large-bore single-shot pistol fired pyrotechnic cartridges into the sky to signal position, call for support, mark targets, or communicate between units when radio silence was required. The British used the WW2 pistol, a design that had been in service since the 19th century. The Germans fielded the Lucht pistol, which came in both aluminum and bakelite versions to save weight and material. The Americans used the M8 and related variant. What made flare pistols interesting from a weapon standpoint is that some models were adapted to fire modified cartridges capable of launching small grenades or fragmentation rounds at close range. The German Lucht pistol in particular was fitted with a rifled insert barrel and a specially designed round that turned it into a crude grenadier's tool when nothing else was available. The Gyrojet rocket pistol. This was more of an experimental concept than a standard-issued weapon, and it never reached mass production during the war itself, though the research and groundwork that eventually led to it came directly from wartime German developments. The principle was unlike any conventional firearm. Instead of using expanding propellant gas to push a bullet down a barrel, the Gyrojet fired a small self-propelled rocket that ignited on exit and accelerated in flight. The result was a weapon with almost no recoil, extremely light construction, and a projectile that hit harder at longer distance than it did at the muzzle. German engineers explored similar principles during the war years, and while the technology did not mature into a fielded weapon in that period, it represents one of the more unconventional directions that weapons research took under wartime pressure. The Lisle Carbine. Several nations issued compact, single-shot or break-action carbines that served primarily as signaling devices but could also fire live ammunition when necessary. These were common among pilots, paratroopers, and special operations personnel who needed something lighter and more concealable than a standard rifle but still wanted a degree of firepower in an emergency. The British issued a survival carbine to RAF aircrew that could fire .38 caliber rounds and was compact enough to fit in a flight suit pocket. American aircrew in the Pacific carried similar devices. These weapons were never intended for sustained combat. They were last resort tools, meant to help a downed pilot defend himself long enough to evade or reach friendlies. The 37mm riot gun. American forces used a launcher designated the M1 which fired 37mm ammunition and was originally designed as an anti-riot and crowd control tool for domestic use. When the war began, military planners saw a different application. The launcher could fire a canister round filled with lead pellets that functioned essentially like an enormous shotgun shell, spreading a wide pattern at short range. It was issued in small numbers for base defense, prisoner handling, and situations where lethal force was possible but controlling groups of people was also a priority. It was an unusual crossover between civilian law enforcement technology and military equipment, and it never became a widespread frontline weapon, but it filled a specific gap that standard rifles and submachine guns could not. The knife pistol. Several nations, particularly Germany and the Soviet Union, developed combination weapons that merged a blade with a concealed firearm. German paratroopers and special forces were issued versions that placed a single-shot firing mechanism inside the handle of a combat knife, capable of firing a pistol cartridge at contact range. The purpose was not long-range engagement but survival in extreme close quarters, where a soldier might find himself grappled, disarmed of his rifle, or caught in a situation where drawing a sidearm was impossible. Soviet versions existed as well, and similar designs were created for OSS agents operating behind enemy lines. These were never standard infantry equipment. They belonged to a narrow world of unconventional warfare where ingenuity and concealment mattered more than firepower. The Sedgley glove pistol. The United States Navy developed a small single-shot weapon worn on the back of the hand, held in place by a leather glove. Squeezing the fist against a hard surface fired a .38 caliber round directly forward from a short barrel mounted at the knuckle. It was issued to Navy frogmen and underwater demolition teams who needed a weapon they could carry while swimming or working underwater, where a conventional holstered pistol was impractical. The design was brutally simple. There was no trigger in the conventional sense, no safety in any useful form, and no ability to reload quickly. It was meant for a single emergency shot at the closest possible range. The number produced was small and its battlefield use was extremely limited, but it remains one of the more unusual objects to carry official military issue status during the war. The Liberator pistol. Formerly designated the FP-45, this was a single-shot smoothbore pistol produced by the United States in extraordinary numbers at almost no cost. Each one took about $8 and a few minutes on a stamping press to manufacture. They were produced by the millions and intended to be airdropped in occupied territories across Europe and Asia for resistance fighters to pick up, use once to kill an enemy soldier, and then arm themselves with that soldier's weapon. The instruction sheet included with each pistol was a wordless picture guide showing how to load, fire, and reload, specifically because it needed to be understood by people who spoke no English. The barrel was so short and the construction so crude that accuracy beyond a few feet was essentially impossible. It was a weapon designed for a single moment, not a campaign. Whether it was ever used in that intended way remains difficult to verify, but the concept behind it said something clear about how the war was being fought, and by whom.